to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen. I've been doing this podcast since September of 2012, and boy, are my lips tired. This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. Anne Marie's not checking in with us today, although she might be joining us later on. We'll have to see about that one. But I am joined by Summer Zell, who was brought to us by a listener. Barbie, one of our longtime listeners, contacted me and said, you got to have Summer on the show. Now, Barbie is like one of the most loyal listeners that we have. She's very intelligent. She's very LOA. She's got all of the right. I mean, she basically is like a single person who is representing the entire listener base because of who she is. That's just part of who she is. So when she says, you got to bring Summer on, I say, okay, I'm paying attention. Let's bring Summer on. So Summer, hi, welcome to the show. How you doing?
I love Barbie too, so I'm glad you love Barbie.
It's hard not to love Barbie. She's a terrific lady. Yeah, she really is. So welcome. We're glad to have you. We need to get to know you a little bit more. Obviously, Barbie knows you very well, but the other listeners don't know you so well. So we have to kind of introduce you a little bit. Yeah. So what I want you to do is I want you to tell us a little bit about yourself and what not only what you do now, but how you ended up getting there. Like you and I talked about before we got going here. What we've learned over the years is that the best stories are the ones that show how we go through the hard times, and that leads us to make decisions, make changes that lead to the really good stuff that happens. And that's the interesting story. So that's where we like to start every time. So what's your story?
Yeah, totally. Well, I am currently in Charleston, South Carolina. I've lived kind of all over. I grew up in Charlotte, lived in Chicago, Seattle, Columbia, Richmond, and Charleston. And Chicago is where I went to grad school. I got my master's in counseling and art therapy. And following that, and during a little bit of time, I worked in residential centers and inpatient psych hospitals for children and adolescents. And that was a little bit too much for me, a little bit too heavy. So I wandered into working with kids with autism. And when I started working with kids with autism, it's in their homes primarily with their families. And I pursued my certification in behavior analysis. And I've been doing that since 2009. And when you're in people's homes, you really get to know the families. So like I said, I've been all over the country doing this job. I've worked with a lot of military families. And then like all socioeconomic levels, all different neighborhoods, all different types of people, single moms, like I said, military families who just have one kid, families who have 5 kids, really just running the gamut. And the thing that really stood out to me was just how much these moms dedicate themselves to these kids. So when they get that diagnosis, or I know we were talking earlier where a lot of these kids also have medical complexities. So they might have feeding tubes, they might have different like autoimmune issues, heart conditions, vision impairments, really all different things. And the mama, when they get that diagnosis, or maybe their baby's born as a preemie, that baby becomes their whole world.
Sure.
And they become experts in what their child is facing. They become their advocate. They're just all in every day. They're changing everything in their home environment. They're opening it up to all these professionals. They get the behavior analysts, the speech therapists, the OTs. Their life is completely different. And there really isn't time when you have that baby like ages 0 to 10, there's not time for them to stop and grieve what has happened, what they thought their life was going to look like and what it does look like. And just the challenges, they've lost friendships. They aren't able to leave their child as easily as some other mothers. And through all that process, those mamas lose themselves in a way that's really more extreme. All mothers lose themselves to some extent when they become a mother, when they have a child, because it's just not it's not just about you anymore. It's about this other
Sure.
very needy little human, or multiple ones.
Hmm.
So I do think that it is like there's a grieving process that all mothers go through, but when it looks differently, when you become a single mom, or when you have a child who is special needs or medically complex, it's just so much more high pressure. And as I was going into all these homes, I realized I was there for the child, but the mother needed so much support. The mother needed someone to talk to. She's sharing her story. She's talking about her struggles. And that's not the place for that when you're there to work for the child. But I wanted to provide a place for those mamas. So as I went through my own journey of just postpartum challenges and a toxic, unsafe marriage that I got out of, I just came full circle and was like, I want to create this place. And so that's what I'm doing now is I work, like I told you earlier, I work with all women with stress and rediscovering themselves and redefining their future. But really, mamas are my passion, and helping those mamas reignite their light and create a future, not just a bright future for their babies, but a bright future for themselves, even though it looks different than they pictured it when they started thinking about having kids.
Sure, of course, yeah. I mean, if it didn't play out the way you expect, it's always going to be a surprise, and
Yeah.
not necessarily a positive one. It can be a very frustrating or anger-inducing or even just debilitating surprise. So, yeah, that makes total sense. But talk a little bit about your experience, because you mentioned you came out of a toxic marriage, and you're now a single mom and so forth. So you've been through the roller coaster yourself, which probably actually provides the basis for you to kind of relate to these women, let them relate to you, and they can feel like, okay, I can trust Summer. She's been through the same thing. She knows what I'm going through. But tell us your story.
Yeah, completely. So I got married really young, fresh out of college. I was 23, and I think that there were a lot of things that I didn't realize when you're that young, right? Like your brain isn't even fully developed when you're that young. So a lot of things that I thought were okay and were just normal as I grew and had kids and moved several times, it just was always like something that I was like, oh, this will get better when this happens. This will get better when I'm out of grad school. This will get better when you're out of grad school. This will get better when we're financially stable. This will get better when the COVID lockdown's over.
Right.
And this will get better. This will get better until our life was really stable. The girls were both in school. We were in Charleston, and things were really like, we had a great house. There was a great job. We're good friends. We're in a beautiful location. And then I started realizing it wasn't a situational issue. It was a relational safety issue. And so I went through my own counseling journey where I really was really able to unpack just the relational patterns I grew up seeing and that were modeled to me and that I was told were okay, that they really were abusive and that they were really unsafe. And having two daughters and having my eyes open to the fact that even though I was being told it's going to change, I'm changing, it wasn't going to change. And that's not what I wanted for my girls to imitate when they got older. I didn't want them to be in unsafe relationships. I didn't want them to be controlled and to just never quite know what was going on in their house and feel like they were walking on eggshells. So at that point, I made the decision to end the marriage. And after that is a whole another story with the whole legal side. But I think that it is a life-changing decision and something that has made me a lot stronger. And I'm proud that I was able to model that for my girls. And now I have my own safe space where I can show them what healthy relationships are and to help them grow up to be stronger, healthier adults, hopefully without the journey that I had.
Which I think is what most women, most moms want. They want to have their children have a better life than what they did. That's one of the driving forces that plays out over and over again. So that certainly makes sense. I'm curious. You mentioned something. I don't remember exactly how you phrased it, but when you said it, it kind of resonated in my mind. Is that's something that happens a lot more than we realize. You made reference to behaviors that you experienced when you were growing up that you didn't realize until later were inappropriate behaviors.
Yeah.
I get the feeling that's a lot more prevalent than we're willing to acknowledge as a society.
For sure. Yeah. I think, again, being in a lot of homes and working with women, I can definitely think that you normalize what's familiar.
Mm-hmm.
And that's ultimately why I made the decision, is because I didn't want those behaviors to be normal to my kids.
Do you have any idea about why it is that we normalize them?
Well, I think it makes it easier because then you're not demanding change for people who don't want to change. And there's also some safety in maintaining the status quo for the group, whether it's like a church or it's a family. If people don't want to change, it's super disruptive for that person, the scapegoat or whoever you want to say, call them, when they're like ringing the alarm bells, like, this isn't okay, this isn't right. And people are like, well, this is just how it is. This is how we are. This is how it's been forever. It's very disruptive and takes a lot of energy and effort from all sides to really look and see what's happening and be willing to change that. And a lot of people aren't.
Makes sense, yeah. Well, what you're describing actually sounds very much like what is often called a comfort zone, which is kind of ironic because there's nothing comfortable about it.
Yeah, comfortable for the person that doesn't want change.
Right, exactly. There's somebody's comfortable somewhere there.
Yeah.
But that's the nature of a comfort zone, isn't it? Comfort zones really aren't all that comfortable. It's just they're familiar. I call them familiar zones because I think that's more accurate.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, familiar zones for sure. Because the unfamiliar is scary because it's unknown.
Yeah. You're putting yourself at risk. It's like, oh no, this has not been done before. You don't do what's never been done before. That's how you get into trouble. That's how bad things happen.
And then if you're someone who steps into the unknown, you're like, it's better over here. Do the work. Come over here.
But that's the difference, isn't it? And that's what makes stories so interesting to us, I believe. I mean, well, sometimes it's hard to tell from what is considered to be a popular story these days, because most of them are about horror situations where there's it turns into a bloody battle and then somebody wins, somebody loses, and so forth. So it's often hard to see this other side of it that we're talking about. But in truth, this other side is actually a pretty big deal, because that's where growth happens. That's where change happens. That's where long-standing situations stop being long-standing situations, because somebody says, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to do it differently. And everybody says, no. And they go do it differently anyway. And then they get a good result out of it.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah. So to me, that's one of the exciting things whenever I hear a story like this. So, okay. You came through your story and you learned from it. What were some of the things that you learned from it, by the way? I'm just kind of curious.
I think I learned to stand up for myself.
Okay.
I am a middle child. I was raised in a really heavily conservative Christian homeschool family and environment. I think it was very rule oriented and very like stay in line. And as the middle was like, you're the peacekeeper. And I just kind of kept with that in my marriage, where it's just like, I wrap myself around this person and do everything I can to help him succeed and to help him feel better. And it would just be like whatever it took. If I was like, I could go to work, or I could stay home, or I could cook all dinners from scratch, or we could just like not have a messy kitchen, or like we could be minimalist, or we could move to this different town. Whatever it was, I was just always trying to problem solve and really be that like people pleasing person.
That's common, isn't it? That people pleaser. I mean, we get that as a theme a lot here on the show. So that's why I venture to say, I think I'm pretty safe in saying, yeah, that's a common theme.
Yeah. So I think that when I stood up and I said enough, and that was something that I hadn't really ever done before. I mean, there was a time when I was a teenager when I stepped away from a youth group. That was a really toxic situation.
Wow, interesting.
That was really the only other time that I had really said, no, I'm not doing this. Like, this is not safe or healthy for me, and not having that community or family support, where I was just like, I know in my core, in my very soul, that this is the only choice I have that is right for me, and I have to do it no matter what anyone else around me is going to tell me. And so I think those are like the two times in my life where I really developed that strength. So I had experienced it like in a religious setting as a teen, and that was very life-changing. And probably one of the reasons I ended up in, counseling and therapy setting. But in my personal life, in my marriage, when I just was like, it doesn't matter what the feedback the community or my family are giving me, I know what I have to do. It's best for me. It's best for my girls. And so just developing that backbone and that trust in myself is like the biggest change, where I know that I can do things that are scary and that aren't making other people happy. And that's okay. And so really kind of stepping into my own person in that way.
What you're talking about, it's different from my story, but there's a similarity. The similarity is that I didn't grow up in a conservative Christian family, but it was a Christian family. And almost rigorous, not quite rigorous, but almost rigorous. And we were the leading family of the church that we were members of. We were the biggest givers. We were the biggest contributors in all ways. We were the most involved, all that kind of thing. And I became a communicant member of the church at age 13, which was typical. It was a Presbyterian, so it was typical for that church. And by age 14, I abandoned the church. And what happened between 13 and 14 is, after I went through all the religious training and became the communicant member and all that kind of thing, I did something that you weren't supposed to do, apparently. I read the Bible cover to cover. Really bad idea if you want to follow the rules.
You started asking questions.
And not only asking questions, but not getting answers. That was the part that really freaked me out.
Yeah.
So in my case, I had to do kind of a similar thing to what you did. I had to basically take a step that I knew was going to be extremely unpopular and not give me any support. But there was also another side of me that said, I can't do anything else. I have to do this.
Yeah.
Like, there's no choice in the matter. So I know exactly what that feeling is that you were describing. Yeah. And it's a lonely feeling. It's also a feeling where that gives you strength that you don't know about. That's what I found anyway.
Yeah. Lots of loneliness and lots of like self-empowerment.
Yeah. Combined together, which is an interesting combination when you think about it.
Yeah.
But it's also challenging, because one of the most powerful things that we humans are able to do is to connect with what they now call our tribe. That's the current fancy way of describing it, but people that you.
Well, that phrase makes me laugh.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But when you have those kinds of connections, those connections are actually very powerful, because when you do go through a situation with those connections, and those connections are able to help you get through the situation, you get through it a lot easier. I mean, you went through a divorce, for instance. I went through a divorce too a couple of years ago. Nothing easy about divorce. I don't care what your situation is. It is going to be painful for everybody who's involved. But if you have a support network that can help you get through it, that makes it a whole lot easier to get through it. It's still painful, still frustrating, still difficult. You still have to go through all the steps. It's just not as bad, because somebody else is saying to you, you're not crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
What you're going through makes total sense.
No, you do need that.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. So that's why I can both be familiar with what you went through and sympathetic to it, because when you go through it the way you did, and similarly the way I did, that support network wasn't there.
Yeah.
And that's a different experience.
It is. Yeah. And I think I did have a support network. It's just different. Like hunt for it a little bit, build it,
Yes.
rebuild your life and rebuild your support system.
That last bit especially. Choose. You can't choose who your relatives are, but you can choose who your friends are.
Yeah.
And take advantage of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, the people who don't do that are the ones who get into the most trouble, I find.
That sounded ominous.
What's that?
I said that sounded ominous. Like what?
Well, it kind of is. I mean, this is just my experience, just from people I've known and so forth, people I've interviewed, people I've known outside the show and so forth. But over and over again, whenever I encounter somebody who is in really bad situation, especially emotionally, mentally, they're feeling trapped, they're feeling depressed and so forth, overwhelmingly, they have a poor social connection network. The connections just aren't there. Or if they are there, they're so minimal that they barely count.
I could see that for sure.
Yeah. So that's why that part of it is so big. And that's why it's such a big deal to come through without that.
Yeah.
That's the part that's hard to convey. It's hard to explain that part of it.
Yeah,
you know what I'm talking about because you've been through that. But that's hard to explain to somebody else.
It is. I think there's some parts, of everyone's journey, but there's parts of becoming a single mom and going through the type of relationship that I did and the type of support or lack thereof that I received that really you just can't understand it unless you've been there.
Yeah. Which is the great advantage you have because you've been there.
Yeah. Yeah. Hooray.
You mentioned one of the places you lived is Richmond. I do 2 of these shows on Mondays. The second one is with a gentleman who lives in Richmond. He's a life coach.
Oh, that's awesome.
I've known him for almost the entire time. I've been doing the show for about 12 and a half years. I knew him like within the first few months of starting to do the show, and we've been doing episodes ever since. And he is also somebody who has a background that enables him to relate to his clients. His background, he was a gambling addict and ended up in a lot of really bad trouble as a result of that, and ends up in the long run, long story, shrunk down to a very few sentences, in the long run working with kids, primarily boys in the foster care system, who can't imagine what it's like to be abandoned, who can't imagine what it's like to live without food, live without shelter, and so forth. And then they talk to this guy who was eating out of a dumpster in Las Vegas, and they say, "Oh, maybe you do understand what I've been through." Yeah. Same, different scenario, but the same kind of thing.
Yeah. Like they're able to just feel a little bit safer because that person sees you at a different level than other people do.
It's like this person not only can understand me, this person's actually going to listen. And I imagine that's what you encounter with the women that you work with, because you've gone through a similar thing to what they're going through.
Yeah, I think so. Like, because if they're talking about like what is like postpartum, or what it's like to feel like they're doing it all alone, or what it's like to feel isolated, I can completely relate to all those things, all the mama stressors,
the mom stressors,
all the relationship, all the financial stressors, the lack of support systems. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit then about what you're able to teach them. What are they able to get from you that they weren't able to get before they met you?
Yeah, so I have what I think is a pretty unique approach. Like I mentioned before, my master's is in counseling and art therapy. So I bring a little bit of that art therapy, like in a totally positive way. I like kind of woo-woo, like a softer, just experiential, client-led approach with that. And then I bring the behavior analysis, which is completely opposite. It's very like data-based and more science focused. And again, I'm not talking bad about art therapy either. I love art therapy, but behavior analysis is like it's colder. It's just, we're looking at the data, we're examining, we're analyzing. So I think I have those kind of polar opposites. For moms where I'm looking at like, okay, tell me about your environment. Tell me about your social supports. Like, what does your day look like? Like, when are you feeling X, Y, and Z in your day and what's happening around that time? Like all that analytical behavioral stuff, and then giving them really doable, personalized, small steps to help improve those to get to where they want to go. But then we're also using the softer, like, let's process this. Let's use some art. Let's go to the beach type of processing. Then in the middle of that, I have the wellness coaching component. So I'm talking to them a lot about their sleep and their morning routines, and how are they nourishing their bodies, and how are they nourishing their spirits, and just looking at all of those things, because we know that there's a mind-body connection. And then in addition to that, because I have worked with kids and I have worked with families for so long, if I can bring in that parenting aspect too. So if the stress and the tension is that they are struggling with raising their kids in some way, then I can bring that in too. So we can have some parenting strategies. We can talk about stress relief and the importance of sleep and all of those things. We can process grief and trauma and attachment and all of those things. And then we can bring in the behavior analysis too. So it's a combination of all those that I use. And I think because I'm a mama and because I can really empathize with mamas and women, I have a really laid back approach too. So I will meet people for walk and talks, mainly at the beach, but some of the parks in historical Charleston as well. And so just walk, because sometimes I think it's hard when you're just go all the time to sit and stare at someone. And it's just a lot more comforting and able to get a little bit deeper and build that process faster when you're just parallel and walking out in the fresh air. And I also do virtual. So if they want to meet me at nap time, or today I did a call with a mom and the dad was sick in bed. So the 4-year-old was just running around being loud the whole time. And I was like, yeah, it's fine. Like, this is like, I'm meeting moms where they are.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it sounds like what you've done is you've kind of merged together left brain and right brain activities.
Yeah.
The left brain being, the systematic, database-driven, scientific approach to how we're going to handle this, and then the right brain, well, here's how we can go freeform in order to make it possible to release whatever it is you're trying to release, or to adopt the mindset you're trying to adopt, or something. You're combining the two together, and that's a fairly rare thing.
Yeah, completely. Because I think I practice both in my life, and I think that a lot of times you need both. In my work with kids and families, and like sometimes you really need those behavioral strategies to be like, okay, this is how we are going to get ready in the morning, and this is what we're going to do when little buddy starts throwing his toys. But also you have to work on that attachment and those family dynamics, and like what is just help everyone regulate and address kind of those underlying tensions to really help the family thrive. They don't just need like behavioral, like a checklist rules, which can be really powerful, but to really thrive, I think you need both.
It makes sense. I suspect that there also is a need. How do I want to frame it? There's a need for a retraining of attitude, is maybe not quite what I mean, but it's close to that. What I'm thinking about is that I often bring this up because I have these neighbors that at times can be a little bit rambunctious, shall we say? They haven't quite figured out that the power trips that they have with each other and over their daughter are causing their daughter to have power trips. For some reason they can't quite put those pieces together. Of course, it's easy for me. I'm sitting upstairs. Guys, listen to what you're doing here. But the message never gets through. But my point is that's something that I think happens quite a bit, that we are kind of blinded to, whether we're in a situation where it's parent and child, or coworkers, or just in a marriage, or a non-marital relationship, or a lot of different situations where we don't really grasp how the dynamics of how we're interacting with each other are contributing to the very thing we're trying to address.
Yes, completely. So like having that mindset shift. And I always tell people, coming from my behavioral side, that the only thing you can change is yourself. So when people are coming to me to do behavioral work with their kids, it's like, I want my kid to change. I'm like, cool. So you have to change. You have to change how your house is set up, or how your schedule is set up, or how you respond. Antecedent interventions. What are you doing to set like little baby up for success? So it is a mindset shift, because we're just like, okay, fix this person. Is like, you're the one who has to change.
It's hard, I think, to face the idea that the behavior patterns we're getting out of a child, we put there.
Yeah.
That's hard to face up to, especially if it's the behavior pattern we don't like.
Yeah. When it's coming back, when my oldest is 11, and sometimes she comes at me and I'm like, "Ooh, that was me."
Yeah, right. It reminds me of a joke that I heard a few years ago that kind of made the rounds. It's a story of a child who's probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 years old, something like that, 4 years old, in daycare, and working with the daycare teacher. The daycare teacher is quizzing the group on what a traffic light is. Turns to the group, says, "So who here knows what a red light means?" And somebody yells out, "Well, that means stop." Okay, and what does a green light mean? Well, a green light means go. Okay, and what does a yellow light mean? Oh shit!
That's hilarious.
But that illustrates it so beautifully, right? Because where did that come from, right?
You hear everything in schools. I'm in schools sometimes. Those kids tell all.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's a theme that's played out for quite some time. I remember many years ago, when I was growing up, there was a television program starring Art Linkletter, and in a portion of the show, he would interview kids, and it was called "The Things That Kids Say," or "The Damnedest Things That Kids Say," depending on which version you're looking at. And I mean, the stuff that came out of kids' mouths was just precious. And the parents are off in the background blushing, That's a theme that's been going on for generations. I don't think that one's ever going to stop.
Yeah.
But it does point to how challenging it is to see that kind of thing in what we bring to our own family relationships.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that if you're stuck in a behavioral pattern, and this goes back to our entire conversation, it takes a lot of strength, and it takes a lot of effort to get out of that behavioral pattern. So you have to really want it.
It takes some self-honesty too.
Yeah.
Because you have to face up to things you really don't want to have to face up to.
For sure.
Yeah. That's probably one of the biggest challenges. And it doesn't even matter whether it's something where you're, quote, in the right or, quote, in the wrong. Either way, it's hard. It's just hard to do.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, because sometimes it's just setting boundaries, right? And like, you haven't had quality boundaries in my life a lot, where it was just like, oh, like, I have to set this boundary, and it's new, and it's uncomfortable, and it feels a little bit scary. Like, will people still like me? Is it okay to disappoint people that I've spent my whole life pleasing? Like, those types of things. So it's not just like I'm teaching my child to be whiny or throw fits. or teaching them a bunch of swear words. It can just be something as simple as that, as just needing to really figure out, as an independent adult and as someone who wants to have a healthy, fulfilling life and relationships, like, what do your boundaries look like?
Yeah. And well, there's also another source of potential confusion where boundaries are concerned. And I think it probably fits your particular personal story very poignantly, because you grew up, like you said, in a conservative religious family with a lot of rules. Well, rules are boundaries.
Yeah.
How interesting when there are certain situations where there's no boundary in a situation that is largely framed by boundaries.
Yeah.
Now that's going to be confusing.
Very confusing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think getting out of that, I remember I went to a Christian university as well. So again, like just rules. And then I got into grad school, and it was really ironic because extremely liberal, like urban university,
Okay.
downtown Chicago. And I all of a sudden was like, oh, like, what are my own rules? I've never had the chance to like develop my own life rules. Like, what are they? And so I think a lot of things that maybe kids or teenagers go through in that, and then like adolescence and heading into college, I didn't do until much later. And I've still been kind of figuring out, like through my divorce and post-divorce, where it's like, what are my boundaries? What are my life rules? Because there were all these other things, and then some you keep, some you reject, and it's a very weird experience.
It's weird, and it's also, I think, probably one of the reasons that it's weird is that you're engaging in something you haven't engaged in before. Because prior to that, the boundaries were all set for you.
Yeah.
Right now, you're the one setting the rules. You're the one setting the boundaries. And that's, well, wait a minute, that's not the way this is done. Who changed the rules of the game?
It's that external, then like internal switch, where you're just like, okay, these aren't on me anymore. So what are my internal set? Like, what are my true values? And figuring that out, I think is really important, and like a huge part of personal growth for me. And I think hopefully everyone goes through that.
And then once you've figured out what they are, then you got to actually set them.
Yeah.
Which is the whole thing all by itself. So it's one challenge after another.
Yeah, it's not easy to blaze a new path. It takes a lot.
What do you think is the biggest thing you've learned coming out of that kind of a series of lessons that taught you how to do that?
I think you look at the world different, and you look at people differently. And I think there's a loss, like there's grief, and there's a loss of trust in the community as a whole. I think that for me, just like the people that make me feel safe and the people that make me feel at home, it's a lot smaller than it was before. And so before, like, I'm really bubbly and I'm really social and I love people, but it's like more of and I think it's just like a growth pattern that will ebb and flow. But I think you go through a time of like just being a little bit more closed off, a little bit more protective, and really wanting to engage with people on a deep level and not as much acquaintances, and being out with really large groups. And because you've been betrayed, and you want to connect with people who get you and support you and are super, super genuine. And you can trust. Yes. So I think that it changed my perspective on the world in that way, where it's like the way I really value the way I spend my time, and I want to spend it with people that are just really high quality people that I trust.
And it's also got to change your perspective about yourself too. I mean, that's part of what any kind of growth is.
Yeah, for sure. I think because for for me, I was just checking off boxes. Like, like you do this, you go to college, you go to grad school, you get married, you have babies, you buy a house, like you sell that house, you get a different house, you like just, you teach your kids how to ride a bike, and sometimes I was stay-at-home mom, sometimes I worked part-time, like sometimes I worked full-time. It was like all over, but that's really my identity. I was a mom, and I was a family girl, and I was doing the white picket fence thing. And then that kind of awaken you when you push back and you're like, wait, this isn't okay. Then it disrupts everything. Like I said before, like some people just don't want to do it, and you're like, yeah, because it disrupts everything.
Yeah, disruption is uncomfortable.
Yeah, and so rebuilding that life and just kind of like, okay, so what does life look like now? Like, what do I want for my kids? What do I want for myself? Like, who am I?
And part of it also is you don't really have the model to lean on anymore, because you were working on what you thought was the model, the one that had been taught to you, and the model didn't work the way you thought it would.
Yeah.
But now you need a new model, and you don't have one, so you have to kind of invent it.
Yeah, I mean, the model, it wanted me to really just die while still being alive.
Good way of describing it.
To pretend everything was okay when it wasn't. To not point out the truth. And at my core, I'm someone who has to speak the truth and speak to what's right. And so I couldn't do it. And yeah, so I think that it completely changes how I view others and how I view myself. Because now I know at the core, it's like all the conventional things that I wanted. And there, like I said, there's a grief to losing all of that. But there's also knowing, like, at the core, what my values are and what matters and what I demand in my life.
And ultimately, you didn't really lose all of it. What you lost was the luster of it.
Yeah.
Is that the best way to describe it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, because we have this, I don't know, I guess you'd call it a fairy tale dream.
And
the fairy tale turns out to not really be it.
Yeah. Because like the picture perfect little family unit wasn't picture perfect. So now I'm really rebuilding something different that is beautiful, and it is safer, and it is healthier, even though from the outside, a lot of people might disagree.
Well, that's something else you have to put up with and listen and be willing to accept when you blaze that new trail, is that there are going to be people who are going to say, no, you're crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that is, again, like why change is hard for people, because you gain and you lose. Like everything has a cost. And so you have to be willing to lose some things, like lose some relationships, lose some stability to get something that's better and healthier. And
So
more.
getting to what we were talking about before about finding your tribe, to use the modern terminology, when you're going through that kind of transitional change, what's your answer to, well, how do I find my tribe?
Yeah, I think it has to be in all different ways. Like I think it depends like what your personality is and who you are, where you're going to find those people. Like maybe it's it could be in a religious group, or it could be in your neighborhood. It could be like in a school mom group, or it could be just like going to the gym. For me, for me, it was my real estate office. I'm a real estate agent on the side. And then I also am a pickleballer. That's how I see.
Okay.
And I think those through my real estate office and my pickleballers. And then I have an incredible group of moms in my neighborhood. So I had a lot of unexpected people step up and really wrap themselves around me. And so I had a little bit more of a natural network. I think that I had already done a lot of networking, finding my social supports before everything was publicly falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
Because there was a lot of isolation and loneliness several years towards the end of my marriage. So I was fortunate in that way.
Mm-hmm.
I just
Okay.
had established a pretty incredible group. So yeah, go play pickleball.
Yeah, I didn't even know what pickleball was until I got divorced. I'm like, what? What is this? And it's like it's popular. Like everybody's playing it. Like, where did this come from?
All the cool people.
Yeah, that's been quite eye-opening for me to discover just how many people play pickleball. But the larger picture that this paints in my mind is you were already in the process of making changes in yourself before the things started to fall apart.
Yeah.
The way I know that is you had already attracted to yourself the circle that you needed in order to get through that situation when it came up.
Yeah, completely.
I mean, that's basic law of attraction. What you give your attention to, you get more of. And you were giving your attention before the breakup to what it is that you really needed. And that's, so people started matching up to that. Like, yeah, that's me too. So I'm going to connect with Summer.
Yeah. Yeah. I think long before I consciously was able to address that it was over, like subconsciously, I was gathering my support.
So that's part of the answer to, well, how do you find your support network? You do it by doing the work on yourself first.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the key. That's where it all starts.
Yeah, I think so.
So, all right. So you've been doing this for a few years now, and I imagine you have all kinds of interesting stories that have come up along the way. But what, like you talked about how you're working a lot now with kids who have special medical needs, autism needs, and so forth. Talk a little bit about that side of it and how that ties into the storyline that we've been talking about.
Yeah. So working with kids with special needs, I feel like it's kind of like an underground world if you aren't regularly exposed to these families, just because, like I said before, it can be hard for those families to get out and about. There's a lot, like when I started working with kids with autism in 2009, there was almost no resources, and now there's sensory friendly movie nights. I saw in my local park system, they're having accessible water park evenings. And so some of those things where it makes it a little bit easier for families to get out, because it can be really uncomfortable if your child is just melting down, or there's elopement. Like some kids get overwhelmed and they run, or sometimes kids can act out aggressively, and those things can be really scary for parents. They feel like someone's gonna call the police on them, or you're restraining your child, trying to get them across the Walmart parking lot, something like that. So I feel like it's a different kind of parallel to divorce. You don't know what it's like if you haven't experienced it, but these families are going through challenges that other people just don't know about. Going anywhere is a huge deal. I work with so many moms who are scared to go anywhere. They grocery delivery because their child can't go through sliding doors without having a total collapse. They're scared to go to the beach because they went one time and their daughter just took off running. Isn't even able to say her name. So there's those challenges that these families face, that when you're able to come in and you're able to offer some steps to help them and the child enjoy their life more. You're able to come in and work on some functional language for that baby, or just systematically desensitize them to that door, and you can go on those outings and like offer them support. You can come up with strategies. I think like it's really powerful work. It's really hard work, but it's powerful to be able to look at like just how you can make these tiny steps to just make life a little bit more pleasant and a little bit more fulfilling for that kid and those families.
And for the parents, I mean, because the parents are really experiencing the brunt of it.
Yeah. And so that's, I feel like, kind of like an overarching summary of what I do in my work with the kids. And I think, again, it really ties into the moms, because there's so much, like, ultimately it is the mom typically is the like the thermostat of the home. And then putting in the effort to make the changes in the home. And so the mom being able to put in the effort and to self-reflect, like, okay, how can I respond differently? How can I set this up differently? How can I get us all to school and work in the morning on time, and like everyone's dressed and like, you know, everyone is staying in their seatbelts and all of the, and transitioning to school in a positive way. Like it really comes down to, most of the time, what changes the mom is making.
Yeah, it always comes back to us. It's amazing. No matter what it is we're dealing with, it always comes back to us. We're always the common denominator in our own lives.
Yeah, and I think that I said before, my oldest is 11, so I first became a mom in 2014, which is like several years past when I had been working with families, and it was super eye-opening. I have to go back and apologize to a lot of people. Yeah, because I think, like, when you're talking about that struggle and like making that effort, and you're just like, what's so hard? I gave you these steps, like, just do them. There wasn't like that understanding before I had kids of just like the complexity and how overstimulated, how exhausted, like the mental load of just like things spinning in your head that makes it so much harder than what someone from the outside, who's like the expert, is coming in telling you. Like there's just so many layers there, right? Like do you have a supportive partner? Are there other kids that are like that need things too? And like what's going on in your own life? You know, like I worked with moms who were students, or moms who like gave up really great, like they were doctors, but then they were stay-at-home moms, or they were trying to run their own businesses, like was the term, like mompreneurs.
Mompreneurs, yeah.
Yeah. So there's just like a lot going on in mom world that is, it's a barrier, it's a struggle to just do the simple thing where someone comes in for a couple hours and it's just like, oh, just do this one thing. I did it. It's not hard. You're like, it takes a lot of, like, in behavioral terms, like response effort. It takes a lot of response effort to focus on that thing and make that change when you're burnt out and you're just on autopilot, just in survival mode.
Yeah, that makes sense. When we do these shows, I always have 3 things I like to do at the end. I can't do one of them today because I need my co-host for that, and she's not here today. So I'll have to kind of skip that one. I'll do like a little bit of a summary myself. I usually turn to my co-host and say, because especially with Anne Marie, who normally does these shows with me on Mondays, she's a former listener. And so she brings the listener's perspective to the program. I mean, she participates in the program, but she also has the listener's perspective. So I ask her, like, how would you tie this together, you know, in a way that's meaningful to you? Because I know that's going to be meaningful to the audience as well. But I can't quite do that because it's like I've never been able to develop the skill of watching myself while I'm actually doing the show. Just nothing. So I'll skip that one. I'll move to the second one. The second one is actually probably the more important one.
Okay.
There may be somebody listening who would kind of like to learn more about what your services are and what it's like to work with you and so forth. And in that thought, we should probably, tell them how to reach you.
Yeah, so I run the private practice Summer Soul Counseling, soul like the sun, SOL.
Okay.
And my website is www.summersoulcounseling.com.
Okay. That's the best way to reach you then. Okay. And we'll make sure we include a link in the show notes to make it easy for people to find you.
Yeah, I mean, they can also email me. It's just summersoulcounseling@gmail.com.
Okay. All right. That's good. And then the final thing I like to do, and this is really appropriate for this show too. It's always appropriate, but it's particularly appropriate for this one because of the nature of the work that you do. We now, of course, live in the 21st century where we're able to do podcasts where we can talk to each other. That was 25 years ago. That was not possible. We can do these things now. This is pretty cool. And we have new ways of marketing. We have new ways of sharing information, and we have new ways of reaching out to others and creating communities and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, we're
so in the process of doing all that, we're constantly putting out content. I mean, you put out content, I'm sure, all the time. Here's what I've learned about how to work with kids with autism. Here's what I learned about my own journey with going through divorce. You're probably putting all this kind of stuff out there because that's what people do when they have a passion. And you're probably helping people you don't even know about because they picked something up and they applied some piece of it in their lives and they got some benefit out of it. You never heard. I mean, sometimes you do, but most of the time you don't ever hear anything. That's the nature of the 21st century that we live in. Not only do we have greater connection, but we have more impact on people that we don't know about. And,
so true.
And it occurred to me that we really should be crediting that more. So I make it a practice to say to my guests like you, Summer, on behalf of those people you've never met, never seen, never will meet, never will see, who you've been helping in ways you didn't even know about, on their behalf, thank you for what you're doing, because you're making a difference in this world.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's really important. That's why I make it a practice to do that every time. So thank you for joining me today and for sharing your story, and best of luck with what you're doing. You have quite an interesting career path going on.
Oh, thank you. I love coming on and talking to you. This was great.
Good. Thank you very much. And thank you also to Barbie for suggesting to have you on the show. Well done, Barbie. Love you. And thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We will see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.